If you are not legally protected in your business, you are leaving money on the table. Hey, I get it. The legal side of business can feel intimidating, but the good news is it doesn't have to be. If you want to build your business on a strong foundation, and if you want to know that your rights are protected when the unexpected happens with a client or a customer, then it's time to get legally protected. This means no more using free contracts that you downloaded off of the internet. This means partnering with a law firm that actually believes in your vision and can help you achieve it. This means legally protecting your brand so that no one can steal your good ideas. There are a lot of ways to grow and scale, but if you want to grow a strong business, it's time to get legally protected. If you're listening and resonating with this, then my signature service, the Legal Upgrade, just might be perfect for you. The Legal Upgrade is a straightforward, structured process to give your business the legal protection that it needs to thrive. Click the link in the show notes and schedule a call with me today. Hello and welcome to the Legal Upgrade Podcast. I'm your host, licensed attorney Christian Hammond. This podcast breaks down the legal side of business to reveal key legal strategies that can help you take your business to the next level. Please note that none of the following is legal, tax, investment, financial, or medical advice. Without further ado, let's get into the show. How do you find a lawyer for your small business who is actually legit? What are some red flags when you're trying to find a lawyer that might tell you that this might not be a good situation? If you are new here, welcome. My name is Christian Hammond. I'm a licensed attorney based in Washington, D.C., and I specialize in helping entrepreneurs and small business owners get legally protected so that they can grow successful, sustainable, and profitable businesses. And today's topic we are covering because of my own personal experience having clients come to me oftentimes after they've had a bad experience with another law firm or another lawyer. And oftentimes there were actually red flags in that situation. And if they had known those were red flags, they might have been able to avoid what happened. And I want you guys to be able to avoid getting into one of those situations, which is why today we're going to cover this topic of how do you find a business lawyer who is actually legit? What are some things to look for? And what are some red flags that might tell you that this might be a bad situation and you might be barking up the wrong tree? So if you are an entrepreneur, if you are a business owner, grab your notebook, take some notes. This is going to be a really good episode. It's going to be really helpful. So you're definitely going to want to take some notes and maybe even catch the replay here on Instagram or on the Legal Upgrade podcast. So we are going to cover this topic. And what I want to start with by saying is that picking a lawyer is like picking fruit. Stay with me. Picking a lawyer is like picking fruit. Because when it comes to picking fruit, it's part method, but it's also part preference. And as I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking about how it's funny that no matter what you're shopping for, it's really helpful if someone else teaches you how to shop. If you're shopping for a car, it's helpful if someone has given you some pointers on what to look for when shopping for a car and how not to get cheated. If you are shopping for a house, it's helpful to have someone who's taught you how to shop for a house. And how many of you can raise your hand and say that you've bought a house and maybe you didn't have anyone to tell you tips and tricks and know-how, and you later seriously regretted that decision? And so I was just thinking about how no matter what it is that we're shopping for, whether it's something big like a car or a house or a business, maybe you're looking to buy someone else's business, whether it's something big like that, or whether it's something small like clothing. It helps to have someone who has taught you how to shop, even with something small. For me, when it comes to clothing, I've come to realize, for example, that wrap dresses are probably never going to be my thing. It just does not work. And it's helpful to have those kinds of tips and tricks and know how when it comes to shopping. And fruit is one of those things. It's really helpful if someone has taught you how to shop for fruit. And for me, it was my mom who taught me how to shop for fruit when I was just a little girl. And she taught me, some fruit, you kind of knock on it, you give it the knock test. For the harder types of fruit, if it's a more firm fruit, you give it the squeeze test. Make sure it's nice and firm. Make sure there's no brown spots or any soft spots that might indicate that it's rotten or maybe past its prime. Some fruits, it's more about the color. And so there's all these different strategies and methods. And for me, as a young girl, it was my mom who taught me how to shop for fruit. And it's funny because shopping for fruit, yes, it's a method. There's these tips, there's these tricks, and there's this know how. But how many of you know it's also preference? How you like your fruit. This is definitely true in my house. I like my bananas to be kind of a fresh yellow, and my husband likes his bananas basically green. And he says, they're healthier for you, they have less sugar. I'm like, well, I'm already eating a fruit. Why do I have to go the extra mile? So we have different preferences in how we like our bananas. I'm sure you do too, whether you like it yellow or whether you like them green. Well, just like shopping for fruit is part preference and part method, so is shopping for a lawyer for your business. It's part method, and we're going to talk about some of those methods today, but it's also part preference. Some of it is your personality as the CEO, or perhaps your team, who your team enjoys working with. Some of it is your risk tolerance. Some lawyers are more, conservative or more aggressive than others when it comes to certain legal strategies. So it's partially going to depend on your own risk tolerance. What is your tolerance for risk? What is your tolerance for, the different pros and cons to different legal strategies? So that comes down to preference. And at the end of the day, only you can know what your preferences are. But there's also a method to it. And just like my mom taught me how to shop for fruit, I'm going to teach you guys how to shop for lawyers. And the first thing we're going to talk about are, what are some red flags? What are some things that if these things are happening, you might know that you are barking up the wrong tree and you might be about to enter into a bad situation? What are some of those red flags? Well, the first red flag is when your lawyer is not a lawyer. Now, that might sound ridiculous and that might sound obvious, but trust me, it happens. People think that they've retained a lawyer. People think that they have found someone to represent them. And later on, they find out the hard way that that person was not actually a lawyer. And you might be sitting there wondering, well, how can this happen? Well, one reason this can happen is because not everyone who is a Juris Doctor is a lawyer. So let me explain the difference. When you go to law school, most of the time law school is a 3-year program that happens after college. So you go to law school for 3 years, and assuming that you manage to graduate, you get a Juris Doctor or a JD. You become a doctor of laws. So everyone who has graduated from law school is a JD. They're a Juris Doctor. They're a doctor of laws. But just because you have a JD does not mean you are a lawyer. Just because you graduated from law school does not mean you're a lawyer. A lawyer requires a few extra things. And this varies a little bit from state to state. But generally speaking, a lawyer needs to have a few things in order to be a lawyer. First, they need to have gone to a law school that is accredited by the American Bar Association. Again, these aren't the rules in every state, but these are just some general rules. The law school needs to have been accredited by the American Bar Association. A lawyer also needs to have passed the bar exam. If you've never heard of the bar exam, it is a 2 to 3 day torture device used to torture law school graduates. I did not enjoy the bar exam, but I did take it and pass it. So a lawyer has to have passed the bar exam. A lawyer also has gone through character and fitness. Character and fitness is basically a very intense background check. Now, my friends who are in the intelligence community tell me that it's not as intense as obtaining a security clearance, but kind of like a security clearance, you have to tell them everywhere you have ever lived, down to the nitty gritty, even if you only lived there for a short period of time, up to a certain number of years. You have to tell them everywhere you've ever lived. You have to disclose every legal infraction you may have ever committed, every speeding ticket, every parking ticket, everything that you might have ever done has to be disclosed to this committee. They have to know everything about you, and then they decide whether you are fit to be an attorney. It's very intense. It's called character and fitness. So lawyers have to have gone through that process. Also, to be a lawyer, you need to have taken an oath. So when I became licensed to practice in DC, I took an oath in DC court. I took an oath to behave in a way that's consistent with the law and to support the Constitution. So a lawyer has taken an oath and they have been licensed by the highest court in their state. And in most states, that's the state Supreme Court. So Supreme Court of whatever, Supreme Court of New York, Supreme Court of Michigan, whatever it is, whatever state they're in. So these are all the things that usually need to have happened for someone to be a lawyer. So just because they graduated from law school does not mean that they are a lawyer. And a red flag, and trust me, this happens, is people who think they've hired a lawyer and then they find out the hard way that they didn't. So how would you know whether the person you are about to hire is in fact a lawyer? Well, one method is that every single lawyer, at least here in the United States, is regulated by their state bar association. And state bar associations have directories saying, hey, here's who's licensed to practice here. So if you're hiring a lawyer and they're licensed in whichever state it is, and they don't actually exist in that database, that is a red flag. Now, of course, this is assuming that you've got their name correct and you've spelled everything, correctly, you've got the right search terms. But if that lawyer does not exist in the database in the state where they are supposedly licensed to practice, that is a red flag. And it might mean that your lawyer is not a lawyer. So that's the first red flag to look for. Another red flag to look for is if there's no agreement. If you have hired a lawyer and there's no document, agreement, contract describing what is this case going to be about, how is billing going to be handled, and all of the details of your relationship with that lawyer or that law firm. Most law firms call this an engagement letter or an engagement agreement. And even though an engagement agreement is not required in every state, personally, I think it's a really good thing to have, even if it's not technically required, because you want to know, hey, what's the scope of work? To use a phrase more common in contracting. What's the scope of work? What's going to be the fee and how is billing going to be handled? All of that should be clearly laid out in the engagement agreement. And again, I've had people come to me and say, oh, my last relationship with a lawyer didn't work out. We never actually had a formal contract. I had no idea what was going on, and it turned into a really bad situation. So, something that is really helpful to have, again, even if it's not technically required in the state where you live, is an engagement agreement, an engagement letter, or some type of document saying, what is the scope of work? What is the retainer? What's the hourly rate or maybe the flat fee, depending on the project? How is all this going to work? A formal agreement between you and the lawyer that you are going to be working with. A third red flag to look for is if there's no check for conflicts of interest as part of the onboarding process. Now, if you are not familiar with conflicts of interest basically means that, at least in a legal context, that it's problematic for a lawyer to be representing people on both sides of the issue. If two people are suing each other, it's a problem for one lawyer to be representing both of those people because they're diametrically opposed. They're suing each other. They're having a disagreement. How could one lawyer possibly fairly represent both of them? That situation is called a conflict of interest, and that is exactly why conflicts of interest are, generally speaking, not allowed, or at least they're not allowed unless you've gone through some proper process. So, what does that mean for you as a client? That means that it's important for a law firm to have checked to see if there are conflicts of interest before bringing in a new client. Now, not all law firms maybe explicitly tell you that they've checked for conflicts of interest. So just because they didn't explicitly say it doesn't necessarily mean they didn't do it. But it's very essential for that to be part of the onboarding process. So if you are one of my clients, then you know that before you ever got onboarded, you got a conflicts of interest intake form. And I told you, hey, before you can become a client, we need to check for conflicts of interest. We need to see if representing you might be diametrically opposed to someone that the firm is already representing. And this is important. This protects you as a client because you want your lawyer to be your lawyer. You want them to be on your side. You want them to be your advocate, and you don't want their loyalty to be divided. And if their loyalty is divided, you want to know about it. So, this is why the conflicts of interest process is so important. And one thing I'll say on this is sometimes business owners who are having maybe a disagreement, but they feel like it's an amicable agreement, sometimes they will try to say, hey, let's just share the same lawyer. And the idea there is that they're going to save money, that instead of getting two separate lawyers, they're going to share the same lawyer, and that's going to save them money. An example of this might be if one of your business partners wants to leave and you're okay with them leaving, they want to leave, you're on the same page. That might be an example where business owners are like, oh, well, let's just hire the same lawyer and that will save us money instead of each of us getting our own lawyer. And that's technically possible in certain situations, but business owners need to know that this can quickly become a sticky situation. Because even though you might have the same overall goals as somebody else, you might not have the same intermediate goals as somebody else. So, for example, maybe you and your business partner are on the same page about them leaving the business, but maybe you're not on the same page about what their payout should be. Maybe you're not on the same page about whether or not they get to keep certain stock options they might have. Maybe you're not on the same page about what they can go do afterwards. Maybe they're thinking actually that they want to go start a competing business and you are not okay with that. So even though you have the same overall goal of ending that business partnership, you might not have the same intermediate goals of what it looks like to get there. And so, even in situations where it's technically possible to share an attorney, those situations can get sticky. And that's why it's so important for a lawyer to have a process around that and for conflicts of interest to be part of the conversation and to be an intentional part of the conversation. And if those kinds of conversations are not happening in those kinds of sticky situations, that is definitely a red flag. Because again, you want your lawyer to be on your side. You want them to be your advocate. You want them to be pulling for you and swinging for you. And if they can't do that, that is definitely a concern. I think we're on number 4. So, red flag number 4 is a lack of communication. I more times than more times than you would think. Again, someone comes to me saying, "Hey, I need to find another lawyer because I haven't heard from my attorney." Someone came to me recently and they were like, "I haven't heard from my lawyer in a year." And when that happens, I am always like, "Whoa, let's back that up. Let's run that back. You're telling me that you hired this person and you haven't heard from them in a year? That is a really long time." And if you have an active legal case, so not, sometimes if you might be a business that you have a law firm on retainer, like you don't actually have anything happening, but you just have them on retainer just in case something comes up. I'm not talking about that kind of a situation. I'm talking about if you have an active legal issue going on. I cannot think of a single situation in which it would be acceptable for your lawyer to just disappear for a year. I can't think of one. Maybe you can think of one. If you can think of a scenario where that would be okay, feel free to send me an email or a DM. But I cannot think of a single situation where there would be an active legal case and it would be okay for a lawyer to just disappear for a whole year. So, a big red flag would be if you have an active case, like there's an active legal issue happening, and your lawyer has just disappeared into the ether. That is a red flag. And, hopefully it's not something tragic like they've been injured or something. But regardless of what the reason might be, that is definitely a red flag if they have just disappeared in the middle of an active legal case. And this is something that is relevant for my own practice because I'm a trademark lawyer. Trademarks take a really, really long time to process. You're waiting on the federal government. You're going back and forth with the federal government. So it's a long process. Getting a trademark can take a year and a half, even more. But even though it's a long process, I'm checking in with my clients as we move along. I'm checking in. And if you're one of my clients, hopefully you can amen and say that you've experienced this, that I'm checking in with you saying, "Hey, here's where we are in the process. Hey, just wanted to give you a periodic update. Just wanted to let you know that I haven't forgotten about you and that this thing is still moving forward." So if there's an active legal case going on and the lawyer has just disappeared for a really long time, that is definitely a red flag. So we have come to our last 2 red flags, and then we're going to talk about the opposite, which are some things to look for in a lawyer. But here's our last 2 red flags that I definitely still want to touch on. So our second to last red flag is if you go to hire an attorney or you're in discussions with a law firm because you're thinking about hiring them and they are not willing to answer your questions. That's a red flag. Now, I need to clarify and caveat what I mean by questions because some of you guys are out here, shopping around and calling law firm after law firm and just trying to get free legal advice. So I'm not talking about that. If you are constantly calling different law firms trying to get free legal advice, that might be what the problem is. So I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about if you're going to be talking to a lawyer or a law firm and you're thinking about hiring them, they should, in my opinion, they should be happy to answer your questions about process And when I say questions about process, I mean things like what is what are your legal fees? What is it like to work with your firm? What what kind of team am I going to be working with? Which lawyers might I be working with? Are there going to be some paralegals in the mix? Who's going to be the team working on my case? What is it like to work with you guys from a process standpoint? How are we going to communicate? Are you going to text me? Are you going to call me? Are you going to email me? What method of communication should I be monitoring and looking at? Is there a client portal? Like, how are you guys going to communicate with me? Those kinds of questions are process questions. And I think that any law firm should be happy to answer your questions about process. They should be happy to answer your questions about how this relationship is going to work, what you can expect. Is the billing electronic or do you need to mail in a check? How do these things work? And again, caveat, if you're just kind of like going around and constantly asking for free legal advice and you're not getting answers, that's probably why, because you're looking for free advice all the time. But if you're asking a question about process, in my opinion, any professional law firm should be happy to answer your questions about process. What is it like to work together? And if they are being shady about that, if they're being dodgy about that, if you can't really get a straight answer about anything, that is definitely a red flag. And the last red flag I'm going to cover is a big one. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I think it's kind of self explanatory. But the last red flag is if your lawyer tells you to do something illegal. Contrary to popular belief, contrary to what you might have seen in Scandal or How to Get Away with Murder or any other TV show, lawyers are not allowed to tell you to commit a crime. They are not allowed to tell you to do something illegal. They are not allowed to advise you on how to commit a crime. In fact, just like earlier I said that lawyers actually have to take an oath, lawyers have to take an oath to behave in a way consistent with the law and to actually uphold and support the Constitution. So if your lawyer is telling you to commit a crime or do something illegal, whoo, that is a really, really big red flag. All right, so we've gone through a lot of red flags about what might tell you that, ooh, this might be a bad situation, or you might be searching in the wrong place for an attorney. We've gone through a lot of the red flags. But what are some things to actually look for? What are some positive indicators? What are some things that you can actually look for and look to when you're trying to find the right lawyer for your business? One thing I would say to look for is someone who's excited to take on your case. Legal work is difficult, it's complicated, it's intellectually taxing. And depending on what you're going through, if it's heavy or emotional, especially on the personal side, if you're going through a divorce or a custody battle, you know, that's emotionally draining, especially for the client. But if it's an attorney who cares, it's also going to be draining on the lawyer. And so, one thing I would look for is, are you excited to take on my case? Because most legal issues, they're not easy, but it really, really helps if you're excited. If you're excited for the challenge, you're excited to work with that client, they're excited to work with your business. So, something I would look for is, are you excited to work with me? Are you looking forward to working with me, working with my business? Do you understand my vision? Do you believe in my business? Are you excited to partner with me? That is something I would look for. Another thing I would look for is specialty. There is a lawyer specialized in pretty much anything you can think of. There are lawyers who specialize in import-export. There are lawyers who specialize in actually lobbying. Maybe you're a small business and the local laws in your state or your city are changing, and those local laws might really hurt your business. There are lawyers who specialize in lobbying and meeting with policymakers and trying to explain to them what's happening to small businesses or any business and why laws might need to be different. There are lawyers who specialize in everything from employment to taxes to finding or working with venture capital investors. There are lawyers who specialize in trademarks and patents. Pretty much anything you can think of, there is a lawyer who specializes in that. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything requires some super, specialized specialist. But there are certain things that are better for a specialist. And so, especially if the legal issue is particularly complicated or nitty gritty, then something to look for is a specialist, a law firm or a lawyer who specializes in that particular type of legal issue. And then lastly, the things to look for are basically the opposite of all of the red flags we just talked about. So, they have an engagement letter. They're diligent about making sure that there are no problematic conflicts of interest, and they are responsive and communicative as the legal case is going and developing. So those are some things that I think are good things to look for when trying to find that right lawyer for your business. All right. Well, that is all that I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, it always means a lot for those of you who tune in and watch live. And if you are curious whether my law firm, Bevel Law, could be the right fit for your business, go ahead and schedule a call. Let's talk and see if we are that right fit. And for everyone else, again, thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time. All right. Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. The Legal Upgrade Podcast is a Bevel Law production. For more information about the Legal Upgrade, you can follow on Instagram at Bevel Law or find even more information on the website bevellaw.com. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. See you next time on the Legal Upgrade Podcast.